Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Bigos. That's right, we're going to make what's described as a Polish hunter stew, which is a pretty ironic name if you consider which meats we're going to use. Since what kind of hunter goes out and shoots farm animals? I mean, if you give me enough ammunition in a small enough field, I think even I could bag a cow. But anyway, we'll get into what meats we're going to use later. Because first up, we have to prep our cabbage base. And to begin that, we'll add a couple cups of drained sauerkraut to a Dutch oven that we've already added a couple tablespoons of butter. And by the way, I did not rinse the sauerkraut. I think having a little bit of that brine attached is going to add some nice seasoning here. And then to our fermented cabbage, we will also add some fresh cabbage that we've sliced up just like we're making coleslaw. And what we'll do is go ahead and set our heat to medium-low. And then we'll also want to place some kind of frying pan or skillet next to that. Because what we're going to do while our cabbage comes up to temperature, besides give it a stir every once in a while, is brown up and add all our various meats. And the first one we're going to start with will be some sliced up bacon, since once all that fat renders out of it, we will have all that goodness available to brown up the rest of our meats. So we'll toss in some bacon and cook that over medium-high heat, while our cabbage mixture slowly sweats next to it on medium-low heat. And then the game plan here is whenever one of our meats finishes browning, we'll simply add it to the potted cabbage and continue on. So we'll go ahead and brown up that bacon until it's well cooked, but not quite crisp. At which point, like I said, we'll transfer that in. And then in that exact same pan we did our bacon, we will move on to brown up our pork shoulder, which has been cut into about 1.5-inch pieces. And we will also season that up with a little bit of salt. And by the way, to make a real Polish hunter stew, you're going to want to go out, stalk, and kill a wild boar. But if unsuccessful, this pork shoulder will work beautifully. So we'll go ahead and brown up that pork in our bacon fat. And then go ahead and transfer that into our Dutch oven. And then once that's set, we will move on to our third type of meat, which ideally would be venison, but like most people that make this these days, I'm going to use beef. Beef chuck to be exact. And we'll want to season that with salt as well. And in case you're curious, beef chuck comes from the shoulder, which means it has a good amount of fat and works perfectly in dishes like this and other stews. But anyway, we'll go ahead and brown that up just like the pork. And I should mention, at any time during this process, if you feel like there's getting to be too much fat in the pan, and it's kind of splattering all over and you're afraid of a grease fire, feel free to blot some out with a paper towel, or even carefully spoon some out. Because at any given time, you only need like 2 or 3 tablespoons of fat in there to do this job. So something to keep an eye on. And then once our beef has been browned, we will move on to our fourth and fifth and final meats, which for me is going to be 2 different kinds of sausage that I went ahead and sliced up. And the lighter colored one is bratwurst. And the redder colored one should be Polish sausage, but I ended up going with andouille, which is basically the Polish sausage of Louisiana, and really quite excellent in this. And then just like the beef and the pork, we'll go ahead and brown this up. And then once that's been accomplished, we are finally done browning the meats, but not using the pan. So once our sausage has been transferred in, we'll reduce the heat to medium and add 1 large chopped onion, along with a pinch of salt. And we'll want to cook this on medium until it starts to turn translucent and maybe start to get a little bit of color on it. So we'll cook that stirring for a few minutes over medium heat. And once those onions do soften up, we will want to add the following 2 ingredients. Some dried mushrooms that we're going to soak in water till they're soft enough to chop up. And today I'll be using my favorite dried mushroom, the porcini. Although any dried mushroom will work. And then besides soaking and chopping those, I'm also going to dice up 3 dried plums. Or as our parents would have called them, prunes. So same thing, just a more marketable name. And then like I said, once our onions have cooked long enough and sort of look like this, we'll go ahead and stir those in. And as far as balancing flavors, the sweetness from that dried fruit is kind of important, although I have seen recipes that use honey instead. So that's another option. But anyway, what we'll do is stir those in and let them cook with the onions for about 2 minutes before adding and reducing 1 cup of dry red wine. And when I say dry, I simply mean any wine that's not a dessert wine. Okay, don't add port to this. So really, any kind of red table wine is going to work here. And what we'll do is add that and raise our heat to medium-high, and we'll cook that, stirring it once in a while until it's pretty much almost gone. And as usual with all reductions, be careful. Do not let it burn, otherwise you're starting over. So we'll keep an eye on that and cook it until it sort of looks like this. And there's only a little bit left. At which point we can go ahead and add this to our sausage and cabbage mixture and move on to final production. And all that means is we're going to add in our secret herbs and spices, which will include some paprika, some caraway seeds, some dried thyme, a little bit of allspice, as well as we'll also toss in 1 bay leaf, and then last but not least, some freshly ground black pepper. And then once everything's in, we'll go ahead and take a spoon and give this a thorough mixing. And then if you want, some people like to add some broth or water at this point, but I don't. I want all the moisture in this just to come from our onions and cabbage. Okay, so there are wet, brothy versions of this, but I believe the drier versions, the one I'm making here, are superior in taste and texture. So I'm not going to add any additional liquid. All I'm going to do after giving it a stir is cover it tightly and let it simmer on low to medium-low until our meat is tender. And of course, every once in a while we will uncover it and give it a stir. And exactly how long you're going to cook this depends on how big your pieces of meat were. Right? This might take an hour. This might take an hour and a half. Hey, it could even take 2 hours. Who knows? So I covered it back up and continued to let it simmer. And I believe mine simmered for a total of about an hour and a half. But do not go by time, which is why we always test. So I gave it a stir and grabbed a fork and stabbed a piece of beef. And it was tender, which means I'm probably done. But to make sure, I also tasted a piece of pork. And in addition to testing for doneness, you're also testing for seasoning. And I'm happy to report mine was perfect and did not need anything. And then what we'll do once we've determined our meat is tender is go ahead and turn off the heat and proceed to make a very major decision. Are we going to serve it immediately, which we certainly can, or as tradition dictates, will we let this cool down and then refrigerate it overnight before reheating the next day and then serving? So that is totally going to be up to you. You are, after all, mi amigos of your Bigos. But since you are my good friends, I will recommend not serving this till the next day. It really is better. All those flavors really develop and deepen. So that's what I did. I let it cool, put it in the fridge, and then brought it out the next day. And to be safe, when we go to reheat it, I do like to add a splash of water. Not a lot, maybe a 1/4 cup. And then what we'll do is heat that up gently, on somewhere between low and medium-low. And as that comes up to temperature, make sure you give it a stir once in a while. And you also want to check the moisture level. Okay, because if it's too dry and your heat's too high, there is a chance it could start to stick and burn. But if you keep your heat on low to medium-low, you should not have a problem. And then once we've determined that's hot and delicious, we'll go ahead and serve up a nice large portion. And please be generous. Right, it's called Bigos, not Littleos. Which reminds me, all you health nuts and paleotrons will be happy to know this is very low carb. Which is why, after garnishing with a little bit of fresh thyme, I'm going to serve this with some buttered bread and wine. And that, my friends, is one of the greatest cold weather dishes of all time. And hot weather dishes of all time. Okay, all that meat and cabbage has formed an amazing amalgamation that is beyond savory. Alright, this stuff is an umami bomb in every sense of the word, with every bite exploding with flavor. Plus, I think we have that perfect interplay between our tangy elements and those sweet elements. So really, just a profoundly delicious bite of food. And with the help of this bread, when I finish, it's going to look like the dish was already washed. That is exactly the kind of recipe this is. And since I am 25% Polish, I'll assume this is at least 1/4 authentic. And even though we didn't use any wild game we shot ourselves, I still think we achieved a very rustic, hearty, and comforting dish. And with the cold, chilly weather upon us, one I really do hope you try to make soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.